I'm Kayla Vanderputten. I'm a senior technical recruiter with Reliable Robotics. I've been in the industry for almost 4 years now. I started out in complete mayhem in R4R. Great place to start as a recruiter when you have minimal training and you kind of just get thrown into it in an agency. And about 2.5 years ago, I moved into an in-house position with Reliable Robotics. I recruit for everything from technical roles to really anything they throw across my desk. We're a smaller company, so keep that in mind as I'm kind of going through these notes that, maybe these aren't quite as applicable to like a large company, but if you're willing to ruffle some feathers, maybe they can be. So today I'm going to talk to you about hiring manager mayhem. Whoops. There we go. So why is it important to manage mayhem? As a recruiter, you have two customers. You have your candidate, and we all know how important the candidate experience is, but I don't see a ton out there on the second customer you have, which is your hiring manager. So I see that, there are recruiters and then there are good and great recruiters. And great recruiters aim to provide the best candidate experience as well as the best experience to their hiring manager and hiring teams. As we may know, the hiring manager has just as big of an impact on the hiring process as the process has itself. We've all been there when the hiring manager throws a wrench in last minute, they want to change something. So by kind of managing this and mitigating any of the mayhem before it happens can improve the experience for everybody. So from the candidate's perspective, this is our first impression on the candidate. I use this image here because they see a very small sliver of what the company looks like as they're going through as they're going through the hiring process. So you want your hiring process to be very smooth. It's a foreshadow for them for what's to come internally. If you go through a smooth hiring process, it's pretty straightforward. You're more likely to get an offer accept compared to going through a chaotic hiring process where you're changing things last minute. Suddenly the candidate's like, this isn't what I expected. So ensuring that you're aligned with your hiring manager is going to bring this, is going to make everything smoother for the candidate overall. So as far as the hiring manager, I kind of lump my hiring managers very broadly into two separate buckets here. We have our newer hiring managers and our experienced hiring managers. The one thing that they have in common, they all think they're great recruiters. They all think they know how to run the process from start to finish. But they need some coaching throughout this process, regardless of how long they've been hiring. With our newer hiring managers, they might need a little bit more coaching than our experienced hiring managers who you've already established a relationship with. They may need a little bit more guidance on building a team. Their timeline might not be super realistic. They're like, we want to hire someone yesterday, opposed to your experienced hiring manager who's run this a couple times. Maybe they've hired 5 or 6 people at this point, or maybe they've hired tens of people. But they're going to have a slightly more realistic idea of how long it's going to take to fill their role. Your new hiring managers, maybe they've never thought about, what an interview plan looks like or how to evaluate the skills that they're going to be looking for. Your hiring managers who've been around a little while might already have a plan that they've created. Maybe they've hired for this role before, or they're familiar with how to create those plans. The biggest difference here is, what does your relationship with the hiring manager look like? An experienced manager is going to have a better idea of that, opposed to your newer hiring managers that don't really know what the role of the recruiting team is. So it's your job as a recruiter to set expectations for what your role looks like and how those interactions should go. As far as kind of recruiting, we talk about our hiring managers. Hiring is hands down the most important thing that they're going to do in their role. They are building out a team that may outlast them at the company. So it's only one small piece of what recruiting is in total. I use the iceberg image because there are so many things that we do behind the scenes that our hiring teams don't actually have insight to. So I try to give them an idea of what the process looks like from start to finish, what I'm doing behind the scenes. If you're lucky enough to work with a coordinator or a sourcer, please give them a big hug and thank them, because I really, doing all of the coordinating is a lot of work, communicating constantly with the candidate, making sure everything's staying on time. I try to do my best to convey to the hiring manager what the recruiting process as a whole looks like, with the goal that they feel comfortable and confident navigating the process and eventually having the autonomy to kind of do so without constant reminders or touching base with them. Reducing the mayhem here is going to allow you more time to build out your pipeline and then do all of your behind the scenes work. So now we know what mayhem is. So how do we manage mayhem? There are a couple things I do, and one of the things I do to manage my mayhem is going through the role description, using your intake meeting as a way to get aligned with the role and the needs of the team. Some questions that I like to ask my hiring managers during this time: what skills aren't redundant on the team? So where are kind of your single fault tolerances? I work in a safety critical environment, so like making sure that there are multiple people who kind of have an idea of what's going on at all times with the project at hand is pretty important. What are their needs for the role versus what do they really want out of the role? This will also correlate directly to your basic and preferred qualifications. What are the future needs of the team? It's really easy for your hiring managers to look at the pain points and where they are right now, but where will they be in 6 months? Are they looking to develop folks inside the team? Are they going to want to bring additional people in to kind of help with some of the things down the line? And when do they think that they need to hire someone for that? So working with them to kind of understand what the needs of the team are as it continues to grow. This is also a great chance if the role description has already been drafted. Bring a couple examples of candidates. Encourage your hiring manager, if they have an ideal candidate, bring that forward during this time. They're there to help you just as much as you are to help them. A great example of this, I was training up a sourcer. They hadn't worked on hardware roles before, and they were helping me source for a manufacturing candidate. We needed a manufacturing candidate who was, well versed on like the mechanical or mechanism side of manufacturing. And my sourcer was bringing forward these absolutely wonderful composites manufacturing engineers, which was great, just not for this role, or internally for us, because we didn't have composites we were working with at that time. So finding those profiles ahead of time and presenting them to your hiring manager might help you, find some pitfalls that are easy to fall into and save you and your team time down the road. The whole purpose of your intake is not only to help you get better aligned with the role, but for the hiring manager to get better aligned. Going through some of these questions, you might realize that, oh, we kind of need to alter the job description a little bit. Also going through and making sure that your review or interview plan is detailed. How are you going to evaluate the skills that you're looking for in the job description? Who is going to evaluate them? Take a look at your interview panel. Do you have a diverse interview panel? People coming from multiple kinds of backgrounds, different schools, etc. Which elements are most critical in your hire, and are you evaluating for those? This is one that I see happen more often than not. You get to the end of your hiring plan, you're ready to move to an offer, and your team goes, well, we didn't quite, review for this skill set, and it's one of your basic qualifications. So make sure you have a way to evaluate all of those. You can also take this time to figure out what's a good answer, what's a great answer. Get everyone in the same room and talking about it. You can set up a rubric. You might realize that there's a lot of work to do when it comes to rubrics and evaluations, but kind of at least figure out the difference between what is good versus what is great. Figure out what level you want to bring people in at. Are you looking for someone who's really junior? Does the team have the bandwidth to support that? Are you looking for someone who's more senior? Have an idea of, when the candidate comes in, where do they kind of fall in that range? Because a junior candidate is going to have a very different answer than your more senior candidates. The goal of having your hiring plan done in advance is to ensure that the team feels confident proceeding to an offer. Like I mentioned, the last thing we want is to have to come forward and be like, well, we told you that was the last interview, but we're a little curious here. We didn't quite get enough information. Let's throw one more in there. We don't want any late game surprises. The other thing is establishing that standard process. So your standard process is going to mitigate any chaos. It helps the hiring team develop a rhythm. They know, what's coming next, what they can look at evaluating in this interview. It creates a level ground for all candidates. You're putting people through the same process. Overall, it provides a smoother process. This also helps you as a recruiter, so you can communicate the process to your candidate. You know what they're going to expect next. You can get an idea of what the average timeline looks like. If they want to move slower or faster, you can also communicate that to your team. Every team is going to have a slightly different process, which makes it super fun. But you aren't going to evaluate a manufacturing engineer the same way you evaluate a software engineer, or at least I really hope you weren't. They're going to have very different skill sets. Deviating from the process last minute is going to cause mayhem. You're now coming back to your candidate. Oh, we got to do one more. Oh, the team has kind of changed what they're looking for. We don't want any of that. So now we know what mayhem looks like. We know how we can prevent it through having a strong job description, thoroughly evaluating the skills at hand, and creating a smooth process. But what do we do to mitigate? Communicate, communicate, communicate. Having open and frequent communication with your hiring manager can identify where mayhem may be lurking. It might be right around the corner. What I typically do, especially when I'm working on a new role or working with a new hiring manager, I'm setting up regular touch points. I'm doing this with all my hiring managers, but when it's someone that I'm new to working with or a new role, I'm setting them up to be more frequent. So maybe they happen twice a week, maybe they happen once a week, once every other week. Figure out what works best for you and what works best for the hiring manager. Also take this time to figure out what is the best way to communicate with them. Do they like emails? Do they prefer Slack? Do you need to just call them up out of the blue every once in a while to check in on them? Figure out what works best for each person. You need to know your process, document your process, and implement the process you've outlined. Like I mentioned, having the standard process is going to be key to making sure everything runs smoothly and also creating a level playing field for all of our candidates. Having it documented is very helpful in case for some reason someone has to step in and cover. Maybe someone's sick day of. You want to make sure that someone can go, maybe to a Confluence page or whatever you may use, that they can access what the hiring plan looks like so they can give the candidate an update if needed during their call with them. Avoid deviating from your standard process. I've mentioned this a couple of times, but the last thing you want are those late game surprises or changing things up on the candidate. Ensure that your hiring manager knows how to use your applicant tracking system. What functions does it have that they need access to? Do they know how to make notes private that contain sensitive information? Do they know how to add in feedback or notes, etc.? They don't need to be an expert at the tracking system, but they should have a good idea of at least how to use it. Your relationship with your hiring manager is going to directly impact the candidate experience, so why not make the experience great for both of them?